It was too bad things didn't go the way you thought they would. You assumed you could just file those divorce papers, disappear, and be done with it. But everything changed the moment my father-in-law was admitted to the hospital. My husband's true colors surfaced quickly. "We're going to split his inheritance," he said, his voice cold. "You won't be getting a cent. There's no money for a wife who can't even manage her own household." I was speechless. Later, when I went to City Hall to start the divorce process, I uncovered something even more shocking. My name is Nancy, a 24-year-old housewife. My husband Tom is 40. We were what people like to call a May-December romance, but our relationship was far from a dreamy love story. There was no whirlwind courtship like in the movies. Our marriage wasn't the product of passion, it just sort of happened. I had been working for Tom's father at his construction company, and for reasons I still don't fully understand, the company president took a liking to me. Before I knew it, he was insisting that I marry his son. Tom, who was expected to take over the company, wasn't exactly swimming in marriage prospects. His father was growing increasingly concerned about the future of the business and feared that without a solid heir, the company he'd worked so hard to build would crumble. He even came to my family's house and personally requested that I marry Tom. It wasn't as though my family wasn't familiar with Tom's. We owned a construction company that had been passed down through generations, and my father had once worked for Tom's father to gain experience. Over the years, they developed a close relationship, with Tom's father mentoring mine on how to run a business. So when Tom's father asked for my hand in marriage, my father didn't outright refuse, despite the significant age gap. He'd insisted on a dating period, though, wanting to give both Tom and me the chance to make our own choice. Any talk of marriage, he said, would have to wait until we'd spent some time together. But Tom knew that marrying me was part of the deal if he wanted to take over his father's company. So, of course, he agreed to the arrangement. Tom and I had a pretty good relationship. We went on plenty of dates, dinners, movies, shopping. Over time, we grew close enough to feel confident that we could make marriage work. So before long, we were officially engaged. But soon after our engagement, Tom's father fell ill and began making frequent trips to the hospital. Since Tom was busy with work and my mother didn't drive, it was up to me, his fiancée, to take care of my father-in-law. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, was less than supportive. She constantly nagged me to focus more on housework, reminding me that I needed to do a better job considering I was about to become her daughter-in-law. "Nancy, hurry up. The morning reception hours are about to end. Take him already," she'd say, treating me more like hired help than family. Even before Tom and I were married, I felt like I was being reduced to a maid. But I still smiled and nodded. Yes, I'm coming. I'll start the car." I was the one looking after my father-in-law most days. Eventually, my mother-in-law suggested I move in with them early. It would make it easier for me to care for him, she said. At the time, it seemed practical. Commuting back and forth from my parents' house to take him to the hospital was exhausting. Plus, I figured I'd be living there soon enough anyway. I assumed we'd finalize the wedding plans once his health improved. So I thought, why not just sign the marriage papers now and move in? At first, everything seemed fine. There were no signs that Tom had been involved with anyone else before, no rumors or red flags. But after living with him as his wife, I quickly understood why he'd reached the age of 40 without any serious relationships. Tom was obsessive about money. He wasn't just careful, he was a miser. He would keep track of every penny spent on our dates, right down to the cost of gas or food, and then inform me of the totals. It was as if he viewed every outing as a financial transaction, not a shared experience. Meanwhile, his mother was relentless. She had a cruel streak, always hovering nearby, throwing sarcastic comments my way or making me feel inadequate. She seemed to take pleasure in criticizing me. Boldly, Tom never said a word about his mother's extravagant spending habits. While he scrutinized every dollar spent on our dates, he turned a blind eye to her lavish expenses. Whether it was for designer clothes or expensive vacations, he was more than willing to indulge her, but when it came to us, his wallet stayed tightly closed. I couldn't help but wonder if Tom was one of those people whose devotion to his mother overshadowed everything else. It seemed like he prioritized her above all else. In hindsight, I realized I might have rushed into the marriage decision. Maybe I should have moved in first, getting to know their personalities and daily routines better before tying the knot. But when I thought about my father and my father-in-law, I felt at a loss for words. The only thing that kept me going was my father-in-law's unconditional support and affection for me. That morning, I was preparing to take my father-in-law, who hadn't been feeling well since the day before, to the hospital. I noticed my mother-in-law treating me more like a housekeeper than a future family member. "Nancy, have you made breakfast yet? The way you cleaned yesterday was unacceptable. Hurry up and get it done," she snapped. She barely moved from her spot in front of the television, where Tom sat beside her, passively watching the screen. "I'm sorry, but I don't have time right now. I need to get your husband to the hospital," I explained. "Oh, well, shouldn't you have gotten up earlier? I need to go out as well. Make us breakfast before you leave," she replied dismissively. I was baffled. Did they expect me to handle everything while they lounged around, seemingly indifferent to the well-being of their husband and father-in-law? "Please hold on for just a moment. I'll be done soon," I said, trying to balance my responsibilities. I rushed to prepare breakfast and served it to Tom and my mother-in-law. Once I finished, I went to my father-in-law, trying to help him get up. "I'm sorry for making you work so hard. I owe your father an apology, too," I said, feeling the weight of the situation. Just then, my father-in-law collapsed. My heart raced as I looked at him in horror, while Tom and my mother-in-law continued eating breakfast as if nothing had happened. I immediately called for an ambulance, my mind going blank until I finally heard the sirens approaching. When the ambulance arrived a few minutes later, Tom glanced at me and said, "Sorry, Nancy, but I have to leave. Handle the rest, and please lock up when you're done." With that, they left, leaving me alone with my father-in-law. At the hospital, he regained consciousness and was admitted after the necessary procedures. By the time the doctors finished explaining everything, it was already dark. As I sat beside him, he looked at me with weary eyes. "If something happens to me," he said softly, "I want to leave you something, Nancy. It's my way of apologizing for making you endure my ungrateful son and wife. I realize now that I've been so focused on work that I didn't see what was happening at home." His words were a painful acknowledgement of the situation I was trapped in. Just then, I heard someone clear their throat at the door. Tom and my mother-in-law entered, approaching me with concerned expressions. "How's he doing?" Tom asked, his voice lacking genuine concern. I reassured them, "He'll be fine. He just needs to rest for a bit. He should be out of the hospital soon." I explained to Tom and my mother-in-law what the doctor had said. Tom clicked his tongue, and it seemed my mother-in-law was visibly disappointed, though it might have been my imagination. A few days later, as I was preparing to visit my father-in-law, Tom and my mother-in-law handed me a paper. "Fill this out and take it to the government office," Tom instructed. The form was lined with green rules and clearly marked as a divorce decree. Tom had overheard our conversation in my father-in-law's hospital room and said, "My father planned to give you part of his inheritance, but we've decided you won't see a penny. Isn't this what you wanted all along, to marry someone so much older? Your plan didn't work out, so go file for divorce. We want nothing more to do with you." He cursed me angrily, and I was left in shock. What? I could barely comprehend what he was saying. "I wasn't expecting this. Just go to the government office, Tom. My father and I will divide his inheritance equally. There's no one else to share it with. There's no money for a wife who can't even manage her own housework." The cruelty of his words was overwhelming. My father-in-law was set to be discharged from the hospital soon, but it felt like Tom and my mother-in-law were already planning as if he were dead. The thought was terrifying. How could they be so heartless? "He's your family. He's not going to die. He'll come home and get better," I protested. "And don't accuse me of wanting the inheritance. That's not my intention. I never wanted this marriage in the first place." Determined to end the situation, I rushed to the municipal office to file the divorce papers. I needed to distance myself from these people as soon as possible. But when I arrived at the office and handed in the form, the receptionist looked at me with a puzzled expression and returned the papers. "There seems to be an issue with the form," she said. "Your name doesn't match the records." I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" "That is my name," I insisted, but she maintained that it didn't match their records. This time, I was asked for my maiden name, and it did match. The official chuckled and informed me that my marriage certificate had never been submitted. In other words, we had never been legally married. He handed back my completed divorce papers. Confused and frustrated, I called my mother-in-law to find out what had gone wrong. She responded nonchalantly, Oh, I completely forgot I had it all this time. I didn't believe her. She had always lacked common sense and had mistreated me because I was her daughter-in-law. You did this on purpose, I accused. You've been acting like everything was fine while using me as your maid. You've treated me horribly. I could no longer stay polite. It's hard to ask you to manage the house if you're a stranger, but as a wife, I would have done anything for you. I could have been asked to do anything. On the other end of the line, my mother-in-law's laugh seemed devoid of any real malice. Oh, she doesn't have to worry about her share of the inheritance. I heard Tom's voice joining in the laughter, and my anger nearly boiled over. I was determined to fight back and not let them get away with this. I called my father and asked him to come with me to the government office. I quickly explained the situation, and he agreed to meet me there. When we arrived, I asked the official who had assisted me previously to explain the situation again in front of my father. I also obtained a certificate of residence to confirm the facts. It turned out that not only had my name not been updated, but my address had also remained unchanged, which made me believe I was registered as married while living in that house. Despite the false impression of being legally married, I had been treated as Tom's wife and forced to work hard. When it came to the inheritance, I was told to leave. I struggled to accept that I had been treated this way. Even my usually mild-mannered father was furious. We rushed to the hospital where my father-in-law was staying. Upon seeing my father beside me, he said politely, "You didn't have to come all this way to see me." As my father explained the situation to my father-in-law, his agitation grew visibly. We settled into his hospital room to discuss what measures we should take against Tom and my mother-in-law. Notably, neither Tom nor my mother-in-law had visited him since he was admitted. Understanding that Tom was unlikely to ever fulfill his role as a proper family heir, Tom's father made a proposal to my father. He wanted to transfer the business to him, believing that if the company were to merge with my father's successful business, there would be no financial loss. Tom's father was more concerned with ensuring the company continued to exist in some form rather than risk its collapse under Tom's leadership. Given Tom's personality, he feared the company would lose customers and employees, and ultimately fail. "This isn't just a decision I'm making on a whim," Tom's father said. "It's about securing the company's future and preventing our relatives from taking over." With that, he laughed and announced his divorce. "She's so obsessed with money that she's spending all her time in luxury while neglecting her husband. She deserves this." Turning to me and my father, he asked, "Is this enough to make up for the trouble I've caused?" My father and I exchanged glances, a hint of satisfaction on our faces. It seemed there was no greater punishment for Tom and his mother. The next day, the lawyers and accountants my father hired began the process of merging Tom's father's company with my father's. The company name would be retained, but Tom, as vice president, was fired. A candidate from my father's firm was appointed to replace him. The official decisions would be finalized when Tom's father returned to work, but the changes would be a shock to Tom and his mother. The countdown to their commitments had begun. 2 weeks later, my father-in-law had fully recovered and was discharged from the hospital. We drove him home, finding the house empty. My mother-in-law had vanished and Tom was at work as usual. They had no idea what awaited them. The following morning, I returned to my own work, knowing that the repercussions of their cruelty would soon become apparent. At the morning meeting in the large conference room, a new vice president took the floor to discuss the company's future. Tom's father announced that the company would be merged with my father's business and that the vice president position would be replaced. Just then, Tom stormed into the room, clutching a letter of termination, while my mother-in-law followed, holding a divorce decree. "Dad, what's going on here?" Tom demanded. "What are you thinking? I didn't hear about any of this." His mother added, "How could this be happening so suddenly? What on earth is going on?" The entire room was stunned by their outbursts in front of so many employees. Tom's father, unfazed, responded coolly, "This is exactly the kind of reaction I was expecting." As soon as they spotted me, Tom and his mother-in-law turned their anger toward me. "You did this, didn't you?" they accused. "You're behind all of this just because you didn't get your inheritance." "I didn't do anything," I replied calmly. "You two started all this mess." Tom's father, with a cold stare, said, "Enough. You're disrupting the meeting. Get out." Nearby employees escorted Tom and his mother-in-law out of the conference room. After apologizing to everyone present, Tom's father concluded the meeting, bringing it to a close. Once Tom and my mother-in-law regained their composure, they repeatedly begged for forgiveness from me and Tom's father. Naturally, I had no intention of accepting their apologies and chose to ignore them. They lingered around the company for a while, but eventually they were banned from the premises after security guards issued strict warnings. They were also asked to leave their home as per Tom's father's instructions. Currently, they live together in a shabby apartment near their former home. As for me, I am enjoying a peaceful life as an office worker. My father remains furious and is preparing to file a claim for compensation against Tom and his mother-in-law for their actions. Their prospects for earning a living have all but vanished. This, I believe, is the beginning of their descent into hardship. I won't be offering them any help, but I hope they've learned that how you treat others will always come back to haunt you.